Wirecard begins 1999 to 2005. Our story starts in 1999. The setting was a quiet suburb of Munich, Germany, where our startup was trying to make a substantive breakthrough in a process that would eventually have a massive impact on our lives. In 1999, at the end of the tech euphoria, if you can remember that, two German entrepreneurs founded a company that provided online payment processing services to businesses that sold products and services on the internet. They called it Wirecard. The identities of the two original company founders are generally not discussed in the media. They started Wirecard as a legitimate business, but like Anakin Skywalker, the company, through a series of events, which we will discuss in detail, fell to the dark side. The two German entrepreneurs who started Wirecard in 1999 were Detlev Hoppenrath and Peter Harold. You can find their LinkedIn profiles online. While Peter Harold kept his record as founder of Wirecard public, Hoppenrath, from what we can see, decided to have his history of Wirecard removed from his profile when certain things came to light. Thinking about today and looking back to 1999, which I have clear memories of, it may be hard for many of us, including myself, to remember we couldn't buy things online with our credit card so easily. Back in 1999, the online e-commerce industry that we take for granted today with Amazon and everything else was not well established. Wirecard could be viewed as a pioneer in this space in 1999. Specifically, Wirecard collected payments from a website's visitors' credit card purchases and deposited these payments into the merchant's bank account. You could think of them as the 1999 equivalent of PayPal or Stripe. In 2000, Wirecard hired a 19-year-old computer whiz and high school dropout, Jan Maric, as a director of technology. During an interview in 2020 with Peter Harold, the founder of Wirecard in 1999, one of the founders, on a German TV program, Harold said that while Jan Maric came across as extremely impressive, the Wirecard co-founder had his doubts about the teenager. Here is a quote from that 2020 interview in which Peter describes Jan, quote, extremely friendly, extremely well behaved. But what I asked myself a bit back then was, at 19 years old and with a high school diploma, is it really the case that you can actually believe all the background information you are presented with back then? End of quote. This Jan Maric hire would be seen as innocuous at the time. But as we shall see, Jan Maric will be a significant character in the Wirecard fraud. From what our research gathered, it was Detlev Hoppenrath who decided to hire the young Jan Maric. The details of this story are scant, but it seems like Maric was hired because of his expertise in wireless application protocol, which allows mobile phones to connect to the internet. Wireless application protocol has since been obsolete, but at the time, it was on the frontier of new internet technologies. Soon after Maric joined the company, he caused a massive crash in Wirecard's network by rerouting all the company's traffic through his own computer, almost bringing the company down with him. According to internet security experts, this behavior is consistent with snooping, trying to gain access to people and company data by intercepting network traffic. Somehow, Jan Maric was not fired over this. On the surface, he kept his job because his internet expertise was indispensable to the company. However, could there be other reasons he wasn't fired? In 2002, Wirecard became insolvent, from what we gather, because of a burglary. Or at least that was the official story, which didn't seem to make much sense to us. A technology company going bankrupt because of a burglary. Was there something more to the story that was never publicized? Unfortunately, we only have the official story to go by. Now let's go back in time to the late 1990s and Silicon Valley. To truly capture the essence of the late 1990s, the era in which Wirecard came to be founded amidst the tech bubble's boom, one must delve into a world where the digital frontier felt boundless. It was a digital gold rush. There was an air of invincibility surrounding what Silicon Valley could do for humanity. Initial public offerings were met with a frenzy of buying, with stock prices often doubling or tripling on the first day of trading. Fear of missing out gripped investors, both large and small. Everyone wanted a piece of the action, and few were willing to question the sky-high valuations. In essence, the late 1990s tech bubble was a period of unprecedented optimism fueled by the internet's transformative potential. But it was all a mirage. Business plans were frequently thin on details, relying instead on vague promises of future profitability. The emphasis was on potential, a nebulous concept that proved highly seductive to investors caught up in the frenzy. All of this led to the biggest US stock market bubble burst at the time since the Great Depression. The new economy turned out to be less revolutionary than many had anticipated, and the reckoning that followed was swift and painful. What does the internet bubble and crash of the 1990s have to do with Wirecard, you may ask? Enter Paul Bauer Schlittengroll. We will just call him Paul Bauer because my German is less than great. Paul Bauer was an entrepreneur in the 1990s, and his primary source of income was not what you would consider mainstream. But from the beginning of the internet, this was where a massive volume of transactions occurred. Paul Bauer made his money, and lots of it, by selling pornography and facilitating online gambling. The question at that time was how to monetize and get paid for pornography, which had issues in terms of customers wanting to remain anonymous, and online gambling, which was new and unregulated and illegal in many places. Credit card companies such as Visa and MasterCard viewed these as high-risk transactions susceptible to fraud and money laundering. Paul Bauer needed a solution to facilitate electronic payments for these in-demand services that would appease the credit card companies while also creating anonymity for customers. Remember, at this time, there is no PayPal, Stripe, or cryptocurrency. Credit card payments were becoming an essential component of these high-risk services, and Paul Bauer needed them quite badly. He needed a solution to facilitate electronic payments for these in-demand services that would get the credit companies to approve these transactions, by hook or by crook. Paul Bauer was an opportunist. He sought a cheap solution in the rubble of the internet bust in the early 2000s. A company with the technology he needed that he could buy cheaply. He found one in 2002 with the insolvent payment processing company Wirecard. 2002. Paul Bauer saw the struggling Wirecard as an opportunity to buy himself the technology and expertise needed to expand and improve his business in pornography and online gambling. He bought the insolvent Wirecard in 2002 for 500,000 euros and kept the name Wirecard. To note, when I talk about monetary figures, I will be using euros. So just, if I don't always say euros, it's euros, and you can do the translation to your domestic currency. Paul Bauer recognized that the merged company needed some restructuring help, so he appointed Marcus Braun, a former KPMG consultant and project manager, as CEO and CTO to reorganize this newly merged company. Let's come back to MasterCard and Visa. Merchants had to report to the credit card companies the nature of the products or services purchased in each transaction. Both major credit card companies had a policy of rejecting trades for purchases from the adult content and gambling industries. As Wirecard had positioned itself to focus on these two high-risk industries, they needed a way of getting around the credit card rejection issues. How did they do this? Fraud. Wirecard created Click to Pay, an online wallet. Users of adult content / pornography and gambling sites would pay their credit card payments to Click to Pay. Once accepted as payments, Click to Pay would turn these payments over to the merchants. Because the credit card purchase is between the user and Click to Pay, MasterCard and Visa were not informed of the true nature of the transaction, as it could be whatever Click to Pay wanted it to be. Click to Pay was essentially a money laundering operation, turning potentially rejected high-risk transactions by MasterCard or Visa into transactions for which they could change the merchant ID into something that would not draw attention. If anyone ever took a closer look at these transactions, since Wirecard was only responsible for collecting the credit card payments to click to pay, they could always play innocent. Oh my gosh, gambling and adult content? I had no idea. Amazingly, we have just started our Wirecard story. At this point in our story, in 2002, Wirecard was purchased for $500,000 by Paul Bauer, and this company has already started committing fraud. In 15 years, it will be worth 24 billion euros and become one of the largest publicly traded financial technology companies in the world. So you may wonder why the story of Wirecard did not end here with a raid by Interpol. What was interesting between 2002 and 2004 was that layers of stability and normalcy were beginning to emerge from Wirecard's rotten core. During this time, Wirecard's fraud remained undiscovered. However, its transaction volume and revenues were growing as the demand for gambling and pornography increased. Although Wirecard's transactions were primarily related to pornography and online gambling, they also had legitimate transactions. Should be noted that Wirecard's underlying technology as a payment processor was performing its job effectively and could be seen from the outside as a good, valuable asset. The period between 2002 and 2004 marked the beginning of Wirecard's legitimacy and trust in the public eye. In 2005, Paul Bauer was considering his exit from the industry. However, he did see an opportunity to further leverage Wirecard's growth. Wirecard was still not a known company given its size, and no one knew of its shady origins. If Wirecard could go public without any scrutiny of its origins, this would represent a massive opportunity to further legitimize and grow Wirecard. But how? An initial public offering or IPO involves an audit, significant disclosures, and scrutiny that would most certainly reveal the fraud taking place at Wirecard. Well, Paul Bauer was a creative and resourceful mastermind. Here's how Wirecard ended up on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange. Shortly after Paul Bauer bought Wirecard, he also bought a controlling share of Infogenie, a penny stock on the newer market, a segment of the Frankfurt Stock Exchange for technology firms. Infogenie was a Berlin-based call center operator whose stock value was crushed by the bursting of the tech bubble. The idea came to Paul Bauer. Have Infogenie purchase Wirecard through a reverse takeover. Reverse takeover is where a privately held company buys enough shares to take control of a publicly traded company. Then the shareholders of the private company exchange their shares for the shares of the public company. At this point, the private company has swallowed the public company and now is a traded public company. By using Infogenie to construct a reverse takeover with Wirecard, Paul Bauer was able to have Wirecard go public and avoid any audits or regulatory examination of its operations, as Infogenie was already listed on the newer market. On January 1st, 2005, Wirecard, a company that processes credit card transactions for adult content and gambling sites using techniques that would qualify as money laundering, became a publicly traded company on the Frankfurt Stock Exchange's newer market. Paul Bauer could sell his shares of the company whenever he felt the market price was appropriate. Paul Bauer was still part of Wirecard, but his active role in the company had effectively ended. This was the beginning of the leadership era of Markus Braun, who was now the CEO of Wirecard. His ambition and his belief in the legitimacy of the company was the driving force for Wirecard's post-IPO growth. This was the moment a company that grew through fraud, gambling, and pornography became legitimate and soon to be one of the largest financial technology companies in the world. We have covered the prequel of Wirecard from 1999 to 2005. And now, in our next episode, the origin story of Wirecard from this point on, and its rise begins.